As we've been saying, although a year has passed since the January 6th attack, for some of the officers who defended the Capitol building, it still feels like it was yesterday. More than 150 officers from various departments were injured during the riot, and while many have recovered from their physical wounds, the mental and psychological scars remain. Meanwhile, some people in positions of power continue to downplay the events of the day. U.S. Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn is with us now to discuss his journey and attempts to heal over the last year. First of all, Mr. Dunn, Happy New Year. It's good to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on. Happy New Year to you all, too.
I want to ask you sort of a little bit about the force today, because we've been covering, what's been happening with the police force. Recently, you have a new chief, but we also learned that, the force is tremendously understaffed to the tune of sort of 400 officers, according to the new chief. We just heard from Chris Van Cleve about some mental health resources that have been made available. But I'm curious about the morale. I'm curious about how this police force is going to continue to attract the best, the brightest, and the bravest. If officers don't feel supported, how do officers feel today?
Well, I can't speak for the entire force. I'll speak for some of the individuals that I spoke with, speak for myself. I work with a strong, proud group of individuals. And although we work hard, we work very strained, we work long hours, we work a lot of days, we lean on each other, we depend on each other, and we take care of each other. So a lot of the support that we have is from each other. The unit that I work with, specifically the first responders unit, is a tight group of individuals, and we do our best to take care of each other. And a lot of times in times of adversity, you have to depend on each other. Because when you're solving big problems like retention and hiring officers, like that can't be fixed overnight. But what you do have with you is the strength and support of each other. And if you look on, January 6th, January 7th last year, everybody showed up to work the next day because of each other. We had to be there for each other. I had to be there for my officers next to me, and they had to be there for me. So it was kind of like we were each other's crutches. And I think that's what's helping us get through while the appropriate people, the management, Congress figures out what to do about the staffing crisis. We can't control that. We can only control what we can control. So we just be there for each other.
Officer Dunn, this week, you and a fellow officer wrote an opinion piece for the Washington Post. In it, you called for accountability, not just for those who were physically there that day, fighting their way into the nation's capital, but for those in power who refused to share what they knew leading up to January 6th. And I find that remarkable that this op-ed landed on the day that it landed, because also yesterday we learned that some in the news media were very aware of what was happening and were also opposed to it at some level, but then publicly had a very different, made very different statements as to exactly what happened, sought to minimize it. Even the former vice president of the United States, Mike Pence, who's, according to officers and according to other people who were there, whose very life was in danger by the threat of the insurrectionists, has sort of minimized it. How does that make you feel?
I think that's why it's so important about accountability and finding out exactly what happened. You think about the definition of accountable as explanations and ownership of things. We don't even know exactly what happened. Like you just said, we just learned. Like a year later, we're just learning things that are just happening. Imagine what we'll know tomorrow. Imagine what we'll know a month from now. That's why it's so important to get all the facts out so you can stop having these opinions about things. And the people that are whitewashing, let's not even call it whitewashing, let's call it flat out lying about what happened. Those people that are saying those things will be exposed as liars and hypocrites. Until then, let's just keep our opinions, as opinions, and let's just stop making these assumptions about what happened. And let's get to the facts. Everybody wants to say what happened and what didn't happen on January 6th. There are people that know, there are people that were there are people that were behind the scenes. those are the accounts that we need to find out and paint a clear picture about what happened. So that's why accountability is so important to me. So, like I said, I don't call it whitewashing anymore. It's just flat out lying. And it's disgraceful. That's it.
You've said before that you actually have faith that the House committee investigating the attack is going to be able to do just that. Get to the bottom of it, expose the people who are lying, expose the people who were involved. And despite the high-profile coverage of some people who have not been wanting to cooperate with the investigation, we have hundreds that have cooperated. So this is my question for you, though. We're going to hear everything, almost pretty much everything that the investigation has uncovered, right? It's going to be public. But I'm wondering if you think that the American people will be accepting of that. And here's why I ask that. CBS News, did a recent poll and asked people who identified as either Republican or Democrat, how they characterize the attack on the Capitol. And the majority of people who answered this survey, who identified as Republicans, described it as an act of patriotism or defending freedom. And I thought, no matter how many people are interviewed as part of this investigation, will it even matter? You were the one that said, is this America? Do you think that the American people will be willing to accept what they hear, coming out of these various investigations?
It's hard to say. Well, actually, it isn't hard to say. No, I don't think they'll accept it. I mean, you literally have footage of people don't even believe their own eyes anymore, and it's disheartening. I guess you attempt to try to reach reasonable individuals, and like you've heard the phrase before: one person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. But that's what that poll shows to me. Like, I believe that these people were domestic terrorists. But if you look at the bottom percentage of the poll, the highest number, they believe that they were defending their freedoms. So I don't think that phrase, one person's terrorist is another's freedom fighter, has been more relevant than now. But no, I don't believe that unreasonable people won't believe any facts. Like, people have their minds set up on anything, and there's nothing you can say to them. That's why I stopped attempting to try to communicate with them, having dialogues, because there's nothing that you can say to them to change their mind. So now you just I turn my focus on people that are interested in listening, are interested in finding out truth and facts, because that's what matters, not opinions. And, there's the refusal to accept what happened. So.
Officer Dunn, let me ask you about this. It's been reported that some police officers, Capitol police officers, were not happy with you being one of the voices of the force in the media after the attack. Some claimed that you made the situation, quote, all about race. Just for our viewers to understand, you've talked about on that day, you and your fellow officers being beaten by the rioters and the insurrectionists with Blue Lives Matter flags, and people who perhaps in the past have stated their support of police officers. But in addition to that, they also called you names that some of your fellow officers did not get called. Just take us back to that day where you, as a police officer, where according to many of the people who were there that day before they actually made it to the Capitol, if you'd interviewed them, would have said, look, I back the blue, I'm for law and order. But on that day, within hours, we're beating you and your fellow officers with Blue Lives Matter flags and then calling you a racial epithet. Just talk about that and why it was important for you to just make that a part of your testimony when you were on the Hill and a part of your reaction when you speak to members of the media.
So there's so many points about that I can dive into. I'm telling my story about what happened to me. Some officers who have been reluctant to come forward have asked me, or I have asked them, is there anything that you want me to share? So I've shared some of their stories too. But I'm talking about what happened to me. Now, I don't think the January 6th was about race. And if anybody thinks that that's all I'm talking about, they haven't really been listening, and they've been getting their information from somewhere else. Because even in my op-ed, it was just talking about accountability. And that's what I want. That's what the That's what my message is. While telling my story, race comes up. Yeah, because you can't take race out of it because that completely happened. And it's a part of it, whether somebody wants to believe it or accept it, it doesn't matter. That's what happened. Um, so if you're getting caught up in the race thing and it makes you uncomfortable, good. You should be uncomfortable because it made me uncomfortable. If you talk to 100 different officers, you'll get 100 different stories about what happened that day. But as far as, the people that the back the blue and all that stuff, like it's just rhetoric, and it's just people using slogans because it sounds good. Like you'll literally have people that'll say black the blue and, patriot and love the Lord in their Twitter headlines be cussing you out in the next thing. Like where does love the Lord and, F you N-word fit in the same context? Like people just like to talk, man, and I just tuned it out as noise. I like to have meaningful conversations, and if we can have that, I'll talk to anybody. But if everybody just wants to just go on and, rambling talking points and not even give me anything of substance, then we ain't really got nothing to talk about.
Officer Dunn, just really quickly, you talked about meaningful conversations, and I know when you were being called the N-word there, you were attempting to have a human connection with the people who were screaming at you. Since then, have you spoken to anyone who was involved in the attack and had a sort of a human interaction and been able to have an open dialogue with them?
Now, anybody that's involved in the attack, I have not spoken with anybody involved in the attack. That's not really high on my priority list or to-do list. But we got to find out what happened first. I have to have full understanding about what happened first, because right now, all I'm operating on is raw emotion and my opinions, and those aren't two good key ingredients to have a meaningful dialogue. Nothing gets accomplished when people are emotional and just talking about what their opinions and their feelings versus actually their facts about what happened. So.
Officer Dunn, I know we're on borrowed time, but real quickly, if people are worried about violence again, not just in the U.S. Capitol, but in many places in the country, but if events take a turn like they did a year ago, are you and your fellow officers prepared to do exactly what you did a year ago, which is to defend the United States Capitol, defend the members of Congress, defend public property?
Individuals that do their job for the right reason, their duty to service, to their country, that uphold their oath, will be ready, because that's what's important. Democracy is bigger than any one individual, and this whole incident is bigger than me. Yeah, everybody sees me and recognizes me, but I'm just one person. Like, there are so many other people that are faithful servants to their oath, to their country, and care about democracy. And it has nothing to do with party affiliation, beliefs, but you just believe that my duty is to my country, and not an individual, then I think that is a healthy recipe for success against any kind of attacks. But let's just pray that we don't have that happens anymore.
Officer Dunn, I know that when you do these interviews, you are talking from a first-person perspective. It's your experience, but I really do think that you're talking for a lot of officers who are not in the position, don't have the strength, are not ready to speak publicly. So I just want to let you know how much we appreciate you coming on and talking to us at a time like this. It's probably not easy. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me on. Happy New Year to you all.
Same to you. So CBSN will have coverage of the aftermath of January 6th all tomorrow and today, of course. Our team of reporters and correspondents will be covering every single angle.